It's time for the final leg of our journey. We'll be passing through Z-axis ham on our way to linear railton. Chugga 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 choo choo. Welcome back. This is the fourth and final video in our four-part series for installing the X, Y, and Z linear rail kits from TBS Tron 3D in our Neptune 4 Plus and Max printers. Today, we'll be installing the Z-axis linear rail kit. While these videos are designed so the kits can be installed in any order, the first step, cleaning and lubricating the linear rails, can't be skipped. If your linear rails are not already prepared, I suggest you watch the first video in our series before starting to install any of the kits. The Z-axis linear rail kit includes two MGN 12C linear rails with one carriage on each rail. For the Neptune 4 Plus, the rails are 450 millimeters long and 550 millimeters long for the Max. The kit also includes three different types of brackets, which are used to rebuild the mounts attaching the X-axis gantry to the printer. 5 bags of hardware are also included, including M5 by 8 millimeter screws and copper standoffs, which are used to assemble the mounting assemblies. M3 by 6 millimeter screws are also included and are used both for the assemblies and for mounting the assemblies to the linear rails. M3 T-nuts and M3 by 8 millimeter screws are used for attaching the linear rails to the printer's frame. To install the Z-axis linear rail kit, a number of supplies will be required. First, and most importantly, 3 different sets of 3D printed alignment guides will be used. If you're installing the linear rail kit in your only 3D printer, please make sure to print and verify all guides prior to starting the install. These guides include a set of 3 guides for aligning the linear rails, a set of 2 guides for holding the X-axis gantry while it is being reinstalled, and finally a single guide to help ensure the Z-axis belt nuts are level. A link to the guide's model files is in the video's description. Besides the guides, 1.5mm, 2mm, 2.5mm, and 3mm hex wrenches will be needed. You'll also need a pair of small pliers, a pair of diagonal cutters, a utility knife, a ruler, a 7mm wrench, an 8mm socket, a roll of wide masking tape, some regular tape, 2 small boxes, a machinist square, and a zip tie. Additionally, some foam blocks and paper squares will be used to prevent damaging the printer's lead screws and losing the spool holder's T-nuts. I created these foam blocks by cutting up the foam used to package the linear rail kit. The top 4 blocks, combined with the pieces of paper, will be used to prevent the printer's lead screws from moving or swaying while the top of the printer is removed. The height and width of these blocks isn't very important, but aim for about 35 millimeters wide and 50 millimeters high. The thickness, however, is important. Aim for about 18 millimeters. I found 2 layers of the bottom portion of the foam packaging from the linear rail kit was the perfect thickness. I cut out 8 pieces and glued them together using a glue stick to form the 4 blocks. The pieces of paper should have roughly the same height and width as the foam blocks. The 5th foam block is used to prevent the T-nuts from falling out of the top extrusion when the spool holder has been removed. The thickness of this block should be about 9 millimeters, or 1 layer of packaging foam. This piece should be about 16 millimeters wide by 50 millimeters long. Installing the Z-axis kit involves disassembling most of the printer's upper half. As a result, a lot of varied screws, nuts, and washers need to be removed, and this hardware is easy to lose and mix up. To help simplify keeping the hardware safe and organized, I created a hardware storage sheet for you to use. This sheet is similar, but not identical, to the version I created for Neptune 3 Max printers in our previous videos. A link to the hardware sheet download is in the video's description. We are now ready to start installing the Z-axis linear rail kit. Step 1. Position the X-axis gantry approximately 3/4 of the max height above the heated bed. Step 2. Remove any filament from the tool head before the printer is turned off. Step 3. Turn off the printer. Step 4. Disconnect power. Step 5. Disconnect any network cables or Wi-Fi antennas to prevent them from getting damaged. Step 6. Remove the LCD controller to prevent it from getting damaged. Step 7. Disconnect the X-axis motor. Step 8. Disconnect the auxiliary fan connector. Step 9. Disconnect the tool head connector. Step 10. Move the main cable out of the way. Step 11. Remove the auxiliary fan using a 2.5mm hex wrench. Step 12. Loosen the X-axis belt. Step 13. Disconnect the X-axis belt. You might find using a utility knife and small pliers helpful. Step 14. Remove the tool head using a 3mm hex wrench. Step 15. Disconnect the filament runout sensor using a small pair of pliers. Step 16. Remove the filament runout sensor using a 3mm hex wrench. Step 17. Remove the filament spool holder using a 2.5mm hex wrench. Step 18. Install safety foam on top of both T-nuts using tape to hold the foam firmly in place. Step 19. Install the foam blocks behind the 2 lead screws. Step 20. Secure both lead screws with the paper squares and tape. Step 21. Disconnect both lead screw nuts using a 2mm hex wrench and small pliers. Step 22. Remove the support braces using a 2.5mm hex wrench. Step 23. Remove the filament sensor zip tie using diagonal cutters. Step 24. Remove the top brackets using a 3mm hex wrench. Step 25. Temporarily reinsert the screws into the top extrusion using the 3mm hex wrench. Step 26. Remove the Z-axis belt using a 2mm hex wrench. Step 27. Remove the left top extrusion screws using a 3mm hex wrench. Step 28. Remove the filament runout sensor wire and cover. Step 29. Remove the right top extrusion screws using a 3mm hex wrench. Step 30. Place masking tape on the top of the frame. Step 31. Remove the LED light strip using a 1.5mm hex wrench and small pliers. Step 32. Remove the masking tape. Step 33. Remove the X-axis gantry. Step 34. Remove the X-axis linear rail and bracket using a 2.5mm hex wrench. Step 35. Remove the X-axis gantry end caps and belt using a 2mm hex wrench. Step 36. Remove the palm wheel assemblies using a 2.5mm hex wrench. Step 37. Disassemble the palm wheel assemblies using a 3mm hex wrench and 8mm socket. The palm wheel hardware and 2 brackets will no longer be used. Before we move to the reassembly steps, let's first review the parts that were removed from the printer and separate out those that will no longer be needed. Since installing the Z-axis kit involves removing a lot of parts, losing something or mixing up components is easy. Let's start with the general printer parts that will be needed during reassembly, in the order they were removed. We have the Wi-Fi antenna, the LCD controller, the main cable clamp if your printer was using one, the auxiliary fan, the tool head, the filament runout sensor, the filament spool holder, the support braces, the top brackets, the Z-axis belt and nuts, the filament runout sensor wire cover, and the top extrusion. When the X-axis gantry was disassembled, we also ended up with a lot of parts. Let's first review the parts that will be needed during reassembly. These include the X-axis linear rail and bracket, the end caps, the tensioner and knob, the X-axis belt, the X-axis gantry extrusion, and the flat brackets. The parts removed from the X-axis gantry that will no longer be needed include the brackets attaching to the lead screws, the palm wheels, and all hardware used to assemble the X-axis assemblies. Now that we've gone through all the removed parts, let's move on to reassembly. Step 38. Reassemble the right gantry assembly using 2.5mm and 3mm hex wrenches, plus a 7mm wrench. This step will use 6 M5 by 8mm button head cap screws, 4 M3 by 6mm socket head cap screws, and 2 copper standoffs. Start with the previously removed flat bracket, making sure the stamped T symbol is facing up. Use 2 M5 by 8mm screws to loosely attach the standoffs. And then use another 2 M5 by 8mm screws to attach the new flat bracket, making sure the orientation is correct. Next, use the final 2 M5 by 8mm screws to attach the linear rail carriage mounting bracket, ensuring the bracket is oriented correctly. Now, install 2 M3 by 6mm screws in the bracket. Using a 7mm wrench, the screws should now all be tightened. Attach the final bracket, used to mount the assembly to the Z-axis lead screw nuts, to the assembly using the final 2 M3 by 6mm screws. Push up on the bracket while tightening the screws to ensure it is level. Step 39. Reassemble the left gantry assembly using 2.5mm and 3mm hex wrenches plus a 7mm wrench. This step will use 6 M5 by 8mm button head cap screws, 4 M3 by 6mm socket head cap screws, and 2 copper standoffs. The assembly is identical to the right gantry assembly, except for the orientation of the brackets. Step 40. Attach the right gantry assembly to the X-axis gantry using a 2.5mm hex wrench and 2 previously removed M4 by 18mm button head cap screws and washers. Start by ensuring the correct orientation of the gantry extrusion, and then loosely installing a screw in the inner screw location. Then, install a screw in the outer screw location, making sure the assembly is as straight as possible while tightening the screw. Remove the inner screw. Step 41. Attach the left gantry assembly to the X-axis gantry using a 2.5mm hex wrench, small pliers, and two previously removed M4 by 18mm button head cap screws and washers. Follow the same steps as with the right gantry assembly, although a small pair of pliers might be helpful. Step 42. Reattach the right X-axis gantry end cap, the X-axis belt, tensioner, and knob using a 2mm hex wrench and two previously removed M3 by 6mm flathead cap screws. Ensure the belt is oriented so the teeth are against the tensioner's pulley. Step 43. Reattach the left X-axis gantry end cap using a 2mm hex wrench and three previously removed M3 by 6mm flathead cap screws. Step 44. Reattach the X-axis linear rail and bracket using a 2.5mm hex wrench and two previously removed M4 by 18mm button head cap screws and washers. Ensure the bracket is as centered as possible. Step 45. Install screws and T-nuts in the linear rails using a 2.5mm hex wrench, two small boxes, 24 M3 T-nuts, and 24 M3 by 8mm socket head cap screws. Use the small boxes to prop up the linear rails, making it easier to install the screws and T-nuts. Keep the screws as loose as possible without them falling off. Step 46. Ensure lead screw nuts are at the same height using calipers or a ruler. Also, make sure the nuts are parallel to the frame. Step 47. Reinstall the X-axis gantry, being very careful to not apply any force to the lead screws or scratching the frame. Step 48. Insert the 3D printed gantry alignment guides to keep the gantry upright. Step 49. Attach the lead screw nuts using a 2mm hex wrench, a small pair of pliers, and the previously removed M3 by 12mm button head cap screws, M3 nylon lock nuts, and M3 washers. Step 50. Remove the foam blocks supporting the lead screws. Step 51. Attach the two bottom linear rail alignment guides. Step 52. Slide the linear rails into place, taking great care that the carriages do not fall off the rails. Step 53. Temporarily install the top extrusion using a 3mm hex wrench and four previously removed M5 by 25mm button head cap screws. Step 54. Lightly tighten the linear rails using a 2.5mm hex wrench and the mini alignment guide. Ensure the linear rails still have a slight wiggle. Step 55. Remove the gantry alignment guides. Step 56. Screw in the linear rail carriages using a 2.5mm hex wrench and 8 M3 by 6mm socket head cap screws. Step 57. Tighten down the linear rails using a 2.5mm hex wrench. Step 58. Remove the linear rail alignment guides. Step 59. Remove the top extrusion using a 3mm hex wrench. Step 60. Reinstall the Z-axis belt, but do not tighten the nuts. Ensure you can see both set screws on each nut, otherwise it'll be more difficult to tighten them later. The teeth on the nut should be up and the set screws down. Step 61. Place wide masking tape on the top of the frame to prevent scratching the top extrusion in the next couple steps. Step 62. Reinstall the LED strip using a 1.5mm hex wrench and previously removed M2 by 5mm flathead cap screws. Step 63. Slide the filament runout sensor wire and cover into the top extrusion channel. Ensure the plastic cover fits in the grooves and be careful not to damage or break the cover. Step 64. Remove the masking tape. Step 65. Reattach the top brackets using a 3mm hex wrench and previously removed M5 by 25mm button head cap screws. Step 66. Install a new zip tie using diagonal cutters to secure the filament runout sensor wire. Step 67. Tighten the Z-axis belt nuts using a 2mm hex wrench and the 3D printed nut alignment guide. Step 68. Reattach the support braces using a 2.5mm hex wrench and previously removed M4 by 8mm and M4 by 20mm button head cap screws and M4 fender washers. Step 69. Verify the X and Z frame is square using a machinist square. Step 70. Remove the safety foam. Step 71. Reattach the spool holder using a 2.5mm hex wrench and previously removed M4 by 18mm button head cap screws. Step 72. Reattach the filament runout sensor using a 3mm hex wrench and previously removed M3 shoulder screw. Step 73. Reconnect the filament runout sensor. Step 74. Reattach the tool head using a 3mm hex wrench and previously removed M5 by 6mm button head cap screws. Step 75. Reattach the X-axis belt. Using a small pair of pliers can sometimes help. Step 76. Tighten the X-axis belt. Step 77. Reinstall the auxiliary fan using a 2.5mm hex wrench and previously removed M4 by 40mm button head cap screws. Step 78. Return the main cable. Use a 2.5mm hex wrench and previously removed M4 by 8mm button head cap screw to reinstall any cable clamps. Step 79. Reconnect the tool head cable. Step 80. Reconnect the auxiliary fan cable. Step 81. Reconnect the motor cable. Ignore the additional connector, as it is for a physical end stop switch mod. Details about the mod is available in the video's description. Step 82. Reconnect the LCD controller. Step 83. Reconnect the network. Step 84. Reconnect power. Step 85. Tighten the Z-axis linear rails and verify homing. Tighten any missed screws with a 2.5mm hex wrench, and optionally, use a small mirror to verify the carriages will not come off the rails. That was the final step in installing the Z-axis linear rail kit. However, if you notice that your X-axis gantry is not level, or you just can't get a good automatic bed mesh, you might need to level your X-axis gantry. In our previous video, we walk you through the steps taken to square up the gantry and start getting great meshes. A link to the video is in the description below. Welcome to Linear Railton. We finally made it. We successfully cleaned and lubricated our linear rails and then installed the X, Y, and Z linear rail kits. Congratulations! This was a long printer modification, but I'm sure you'll agree, it was more than worth the time and effort. Now, go print your next great creation. Oh, but before you go, if you haven't already, please subscribe and like this video so you can be the first to learn about our future videos, printer modifications, and enhancements to Bed Leveler 5000. Thanks for watching. We've reached our final destination. Please be careful as you exit the train.